We're finally talking about these things.
Yeah.
We're normalizing getting help. Men are talking about mental health.
Do we just want to just be in survival mode, or do we
Right.
want to live a full, beautiful life?
Right. Our energy, our souls continue on. We keep growing. We keep
Yeah.
evolving. I
Yeah.
think the reason we do is to, one, continue evolving ourselves, but to continue learning and spreading love and light.
Welcome to the Mapuana Reed Show. Today we have Lenore here, and she's going to talk to us all about brain spotting. It's something that I recently learned about. But welcome to the show, Lenore.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
I'm thrilled to be here in this beautiful space with you. So thanks so much.
I'm happy you are here.
Thank you.
So go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, what you do, and all the wonderful things.
Amazing. So I'm Lenore Matthew. I'm a doctor of social work. I live here in Honolulu. Been here for a few years. In my work as a social worker, I use my main practice working with people is a technique called Brainspotting that you just mentioned, which is a neurobiological tool to help us move through emotional blockages and really into a space of freedom, recovery, expansion. But I hold a very spiritual and very intuitive frame, so I actually work in more kind of a coaching frame. And my focus is on post-traumatic growth. So I work with people, and I'm one of those people who have gone through something very heavy in life, be that whatever it is, and they're working towards the other side. So really my sweet spot working with people is after they've done the heavy lifting, after they've gone through the deep trauma work, the acute trauma work, which is done with a clinical psychologist or clinical therapist, or however they choose to work through that. Also spirituality and body-based, we can talk about all of that. But I work with people when they're really at a juncture of, I went through something that was really thick, probably quite painful, definitely transformative in their life, and I know that there's a reason that I'm here. And probably what happened to me is related to that reason. And so and that reason may be reasons, it can be personal, professional, it's probably all of the above. But I really work with people who are stepping into that why, that purpose, by way of what happened.
Mm-hmm. So it's after they've gone through some type of therapy, and then now they're ready for like the next step.
Yeah, essentially. And it's not so black and white, right? It's like the process of being ready for something after a deep trauma, it can start from day one. I knew with what I went through that it was from the moment that it happened, almost within a few days. I was like, I know that there's a bigger reason that I'm here, but we can't rush that. And so it's kind of sometimes a parallel process. But where I come in is really after the acute heavy lifting of the pain and the physiological trauma and mental trauma of what's happened or manifestations of a traumatic event. Then it's, yes, when someone is like, okay, I know that it's time. I know that I'm ready to start moving forward, moving on to the next chapter. And it may be that there's some back and forth, and I think that there almost always is, into, okay, another layer has opened. I have to go back to more healing. But yeah, so I kind of am further along in the process, if you will, but keeping close to my heart and knowing from my own experience that there is this back and forth and that we're these beautiful onions that continue to peel back layers.
Yeah. So tell me, what is brain spotting, and how did you find out about brain spotting?
Yeah.
Because I only heard about it through you. I've never heard of I was like, what is brain spotting? You know?
Yeah. So at its essence, at its core, brain spotting is it's a mental health tool, really in its origin for trauma treatment. And again, it's a fairly new tool. It's a couple of decades old. It's really only gained traction really post-COVID when we're starting to understand that mental health care is not just talk therapy. It's so much bigger than that, and we need different tools to be able to move through trauma. But it's a tool, it's a non-invasive approach, brain spotting, that works with the deep subcortical brain, so the subconscious brain. So talk therapy and cognitive-based approaches, which are the norm in mental health therapy, definitely in social work, my field, those target the prefrontal cortex, or this part of the brain that sits just behind the forehead. This is our most evolved part. This sets us apart from other mammals, evolved part of the brain, sets us apart from other mammals in that it allows us to be logical, and it allows us to be decision makers, and it's where our communication abilities come from. So our cognitive-based, talk-based approaches target really that part of the brain. However, when traumatic experiences happen, sometimes when they happen, pre-verbal or even in vitro, so before we're able to express ourselves, imprints of those traumatic events are stored in very different parts of the brain. And that's quite literally in this part of the brain, the deep brain. So from around here down to the brain stem, and that includes our hippocampus, our amygdala, so our fight or flight centers, our emotional centers. And what brain spotting does is a derivative of EMDR, which is another brain body therapy or therapeutic approach. They're different, and if we can talk about that, and there's lots of information that's coming out about how they're different. They're different in technique and they're different somewhat in results. But essentially, what happens is brain spotting, like EMDR, they isolate and utilize eye movements to connect to the subcortical part of the brain. And so in brain spotting, we use a tool, or you can use a gaze spot to use after we've invoked an experience that someone wants to work through.
Mm-hmm.
We use eye movement, so we find the emotions in the body. So if someone comes and they want to work through anxiety, they don't know where it comes from, but they just have this hold on them that resonates, and heart palpitations, and you feel anxious, and they know there's something there. So we can go into the anxiety, we can invoke that, we can allow it to rise, and then we'll find, either by using a tool that looks somewhat like a pointer, or just using a gaze spot by allowing the individual to organically look around the room, we can find the spot where the body, between the eye movement and where they're looking, where the body says that's the spot. And what that does, it essentially opens the door, or it's a window open to where in the subconscious brain, in the subcortical brain, those imprints of what happened, of what caused the roots of that anxiety, where that comes from. So it allows it to come up and out. I work in a complementary way as well, and I think a lot of brain spotters do, where we can go into difficult experiences, or we can also expand really positive sensations. So using brain spotting, so same experience where we find your brain spot in your peripheral vision or in your visual field to find where the body says that's the spot, but we can unfold and unpack and get really, really big expansion points. Mm. So connection to soul, connection to higher power, manifesting spots, replacing limiting belief with expansive beliefs. So there's a way then that we can essentially carve new neural pathways, so our brain automatically feels, thinks, and behaves differently.
Does someone have to go through a traumatic experience to gain these benefits? Or what if someone just I just want to just tap in to my expanded self?
Yeah, absolutely. Someone can just tap in. No,
Yeah.
no. And I think this is what's so important about, or what's so exciting, I'll say that, about this modality, and why I love it so much, especially as in my own experience, I've moved out of deep trauma recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can use it for all of the good things and to allow it to get really big. And I think, too, when we talk about trauma, it's relative. Mm-hmm. So we talk about in the social work space or in the psychology space, big T's and little T's. So big traumas, little traumas. Mm-hmm. And trauma is all relative to an individual. It's all relative to the resources we had when something happened to us. It's relative to whether we were able to expel, get out, talk about what happened, if we had support when it did. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the gravity of what happens is also a factor. But someone could go through, a tragic accident, person A and person B, and they could have very different experiences around what happened, just based on who they are, their life experiences, the support they had, the physical body they had, the emotional capacity that they have as well. So it really is relative to the individual. But yes, in terms of anyone accessing it, absolutely. It's kind of like anyone can access the benefits of yoga or meditation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so there are different things that an individual will take from those practices, but the benefits are infinite.
Yeah. What are some of the benefits that you've seen with either with yourself or with other clients that you've worked with?
Yeah. So I think I'll back up and talk about how it's affected this practice and how it's affected me and how it really fits into my experience.
Yeah.
So in 2020, I unexpectedly lost my husband. He passed away very tragically. He ended his own life. And it was out of the blue. There were no signs that he was struggling before he passed. In retrospect, I understand a lot and can identify signs that were there. But at the time, it wasn't clear. There weren't any kind of typical, I suppose, right? Mm-hmm. Manifestations that the media or even the mental health world say is common if someone is struggling mentally. So he was a very happy, go lucky, like lovely, calm, empathetic, joyful, joyous, loving human. Everybody loved him so much, including obviously myself. But he's just a light. He's just a light. I realize looking back in time, I think he muted a lot of, I know he muted, obviously, a lot of what was happening inside him. So, to some extent, being as peaceful and kind and easygoing as he was, to some extent, that was his coping and maybe a bit of a mask. But at the time, there was nothing that I would have recognized. When he passed, it was like my world obliterated. And I talk about this a lot, so I don't know why I'm crying now, but it's an emotional week, so we're going to let it go. My world was turned upside down. And I think the world of a lot of our people in our circle was turned upside down as well. I mean, of his best friends, of people who he loved and love him very much. And I experienced an upheaval and a pain like I've never experienced, and I don't think I'll ever experience again. Like once you've experienced that, that's your like the baseline. And I'll never experience something as painful as that again. Largely due to the healing that's happened. But I'll go back to that. But it was, I mean, for years it was warfare on my body. And the first year of loss, I don't think it was even grief. It was survival, and it was allowing my body and brain to even begin to try to understand what had happened. It was at least a year before I could really comprehend that he had passed away, that he was gone. And when he passed, it was in the context of COVID was just hitting. It was March 5th, 2020. The world is shutting down.
I think like March 15th or something. Didn't everything just shut down?
100%. Yes.
Gosh.
Yes. So he died March 5th, and we were living abroad. We were in Spain. We had just got a new house in Spain.
How long were you married at this point?
We were together for 13 years.
Wow.
And we were married for almost 3.
Wow.
Yeah. So we met, I was 36 when he passed, and we met, I mean, we were in our early 20s. So essentially we grew up together.
Yeah.
So we were living in Spain. We're from 2 different countries. I'm from the States, from the continent. He was from Argentina. And we've been living in Europe for a long time for our jobs and for work. And just because we loved, that was part of us. We loved living abroad and speaking languages and all of this. And he passed, and Spain and Italy were the epicenter of COVID in Europe. And so I mean, it was madness. It was absolute chaos. And he passed. My mom, my best friend who was pregnant, my sister all flew over. We had friends from all over Europe that flew in to help, and then other friends who were in Spain that came down to help me and help ourselves just figure out what to do. I'd never lost anyone before, especially not suddenly. And obviously not my husband. And so as I'm trying to figure out what to do, and as the spouse, I mean, there's so many things, decisions and things that are put in front of you with almost no empathy as well, and you're frozen, and it was so much there. So we were able in 10 days to at least resolve what we could around his passing, and then my mom and I got the second to last flight out of Spain. Wow. Until later, years later. It was in, I think, 2021, or if maybe late 2020, when finally Spain opened back up. But second to last flight out of Spain to the U.S., last 2 seats. I mean, it was just
my gosh.
Total chaos.
Oh, gosh.
It was, I mean, this is like the extent of the trauma, yeah? But, and not to harp on it, I think I share this because it's the context, but it's also just to give, I guess, cushion to the fact that it won't always be this way, yeah?
Yeah.
So I moved back to the States. I moved back to my parents for a year and was just processing. And in that point, so many things happened. And I think before even way before I was able to get into my brain around what was happening, I first was in my spirit and then in my body, and then came into the brain and the mind. And to me as a social worker, my perspective, and working in post-traumatic growth, my perspective is growth happens and trauma recovery happens at the brain, at the body, and at the spirit. And so for me, it really came online first, my spirit, my spiritual connection to my late husband. I mean, there were signs all the time that he was sending. I documented them, being the practitioner and researcher that I am. I documented everything in files of like what happened, dates and times,
Wow.
photos if I could, videos.
Yeah.
But it was guiding me and leading me forward. And I knew this. And there were so many questions. Again, as I said, that first year of grief was really just surviving. I was trying to understand what happened. Through his signs, through what I knew was a spiritual connection that we still had at the soul level, at the heart, I was able to figure out and uncover like a little bit more and understand, I'll say, a little bit more about what happened, what he was going through. And I was able to uncover that he had gone through horrific childhood trauma, never told me, never sought professional help. And he had written about it, and I found his writings. And so everything that I uncovered in that first year, it was almost like another death. It was another thing that I learned for, I mean, someone who I love so much, who was the person I trusted most in the world. And for all that I knew, that's how he felt as well. But still, there was something so deep in him that he couldn't bring himself to share. And it was so painful. And for him being, I mean, who he was, a man from, I think there are cultural aspects as well. Being a Latino man, he didn't feel at that point in life, it's very different now, but he couldn't talk about what happened. And so it was in that first year that I had heard kind of in passing Brainspotting. And I was like, okay, that's way too early for me. I'm not even, it's like, I just knew intuitively that there was something that I was not yet ready for. But along the way, I mean, I tried everything to heal. So I saw two counselors for a year, a grief counselor and then a trauma counselor.
And this is all within your first year?
In the first year. And that was so important to me. I needed to talk. I needed to get out what was happening. I needed to talk about the spiritual signs that were happening.
And then to release, like tell someone.
Yes, and normalize it and learn from my counselors. Even being a social worker, I didn't understand a lot around this. I mean, I worked in the policy world before as a social worker. So I was in international policy. I worked at the UN. So it was a very different world, very kind of high level and almost kind of apart from human reality. And then all of a sudden I'm in the crux of human reality. So I saw counselors, I saw mediums, I saw energy healers. My own mediumship was opening up with my connection to my late husband. I started taking spiritual development classes. And a lot of this, I mean, a lot of it was like this identity kind of evolution that happened during the process, in that I had gone from this, researcher, very proud of who I was, social worker working in policy, this happy expat with my husband, and all of a sudden I'm now a 36-year-old widow living at my parents' house in lockdown, which is a whole nother animal. Going back to speaking one language, not speaking the language that we spoke all the time. I mean, there are so many levels of identity. I've lost my husband, and now all of a sudden I'm having these very spiritual, soulful experiences and opening up to this world that, for the most part, the mainstream is saying isn't real or isn't valid. And so it was like every aspect of my soul, of my ego, of myself was just crumbled, obliterated like
Were
a
you
bulldozer.
a spiritual person prior to this though? Like, were you into like some of the woo things that they have out there, like the breath work and all that kind of stuff?
Before,
Really?
no, I wasn't.
So this was just completely, it's like a complete different
world.
100% everything.
Yes. And I will say, I had resigned from the UN where I was working. So I was at the United Nations before. After I'd finished my doctorate, I went to the UN. And Bruno and I had lived around, my late husband and I had lived abroad for a while. But I had resigned. There was something in my gut, and this was months before he passed. There was something in my gut that was telling me I'm going to be moving towards something else. Like, I'm going to be working more with people. This, like, mecca of humanitarian work that I'd worked so hard for to get to through my PhD was no longer it. And it was like, and it's interesting, we were talking about it even this morning, of it's like the evolutions, the upgrades happen so fast, and sometimes it's so unexpected, but it's so powerful you can't not open up to it and acknowledge it. And I didn't recognize it as such, obviously, in the time. I didn't have the vernacular, I didn't have a framework to understand it, I just knew. So I'd resigned, and then we took a 3-month sabbatical to South Asia. And I really wanted to explore yoga and meditation. And so we started exploring it then. I learned about the chakras. I had no idea what any of this was before. And so I think my soul was preparing me for the things that I would need. So in that first year of grief, it was every day I had to spend a day in, or spend time each day in nature. Every day I needed to do some sort of gentle yin yoga. It was just like my body it was like my medicine. And I understand now that I've studied trauma. It's a few years later. I understand somatically what that does. It allowed energy to process. It brought me out of my cognitive mind and into my emotions. I could feel things. At that point, I just knew I needed it. So these are the kinds of things, like, I had gently been exposed to them before. And as soon as he passed, like, my soul knew what I needed. And it was years down the line. I mean, there was so much that happened during it. And again, trying everything. So yes, tried breath work, got into breath work, which is amazing. Yoga, I still practice every day now, teach yoga as well. So it was part of my journey. Exploring, Reiki, all of the different processes and tools. It was anything that I could find, again, like mediums, psychics, whomever, people I trusted, people that I learned lessons from that I had no idea where to start. But it was this last year. And at that point, it had been 3.5 years. And I got to a point, my parents were here visiting. Sorry.
Okay.
My parents were here visiting for the holiday. And as anyone who's been, I'm actually looking at one of my brain spots now to like come back into my body and connect to my soul. And as anyone who's been through deep trauma knows, there can be this anchor that lives in you. And you can do everything in your power to try to alleviate it and have it go away. But it can be there, and it can still be there. And for me, after having done everything that I had, I came to a point, and I remember telling my mom and I are really close, and both my parents and I are close. And I told my mom, I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I said, I've tried so hard. So hard. And I've done everything. I've rebuilt my life. I moved to a totally new place because my gut and intuition told me to move Hawaii. I'm so glad that I did. It has been my place for rebuilding, and just, my soul has found itself again here, trying everything, all the modalities, but there was still something in me every day that felt like a fight. And there's this meme that I think about often that was going around, like around COVID time, and it's all around the grief circles. And it's this black and white kind of sketch drawing, and it's this jar that stays the same, or how is it? No, there's a ball inside, a black ball inside, and that stays the same size, but the jar changes in size. And it said this is grief that will always have, and we can even expand that, so that's deep trauma. And so we always have that anchor, that iron ball in us, but the meme is like, the love that you feel will grow around it. And to me, I was like, I don't accept that. I can't accept that. I do not accept this anchor in my body. I cannot live with this iron weight in me. I can't. And
it's a feeling like you just want it out. Like, I don't even want a little anchor.
Yeah.
I want it just completely out of me.
I can't do this. And I could put on a face. I'm naturally, innately a very happy, positive person. I've always been a very joyful person. But this weight of it, I was just like, and I believed what I heard and what other really advocates in the grief space said of, you'll always feel this pain, or in the trauma space, you'll always have some of this in you. And I internalized it and I believed it. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I went to bed that night and I told Bruno on the other side, I said, help me. Like, you've done so well so far helping me. I know the extent to which we've healed together. Every layer that I heal, I feel his spirit lighter. Every layer that he realizes on the other side, he gives me information. It's just like back and forth. I think if that's what soulmates are, be them a partner, a child, a parent, a best friend, if someone's on the other side who's a soulmate, I don't think it's only people who've been married, no, by no means, but someone who is here to help your soul evolve, you continue that. I know that, I trust that, I believe that, that's one of my truths. And so I told him that night, I was like, please help me. Help me. Like, I cannot continue this way. I feel like my brain is on fire. I feel like my gut is weighed down, and this does not work for me anymore. I'm so tired of it. I'm so tired of myself. And I woke up the next morning, clear as day. I sat up in bed, and it was just this, like, very clear. I saw it written, I heard it in my brain, and it said Brainspotting.
Wow.
Try it. And I said,
Yeah.
okay. And so, I mean, here in the islands, it's mental health care it's hard. There's wait
Yeah.
lists. I mean, anywhere it's hard. It's hard to find someone in general, but someone that you vibe with. I mean, it's very much a relationship. Finding a psychologist or therapist that you trust is a little bit like dating. You got to test the
Right.
waters.
Yeah.
You got to go out once. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
that's
Go to
not for
dinner a
me.
couple of
Right.
times.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I was just finding, with the knowledge that I have as a social worker, I knew where to look to find someone. But I mean, my heart is with people who don't know where to start. But tuning in, trusting that this is part of my process, I was Googling and just trying to find anyone that would do brain spotting with me. And so I'm texting or emailing rather people like Alabama or like California, like anybody, right? And I happened to come across someone in Hawaii, and it's really important to me. So a lot of the work that I've done over the last years has been in opening up the mental health space to bring in spirituality and bring in this intuitive side, that this is a very important and meaningful part of healing and recovery for people. And so for me, when I was finding my own practitioner, after that first year of grief, I decided, and my therapist and I decided, we didn't need to work on grief counseling anymore. I was starting to rebuild life, so I let that kind of move aside. This is now 3.5 years later. I was like, I need help again. I'm at a different place. I need something that's going to get into my brain. I just knew it. And I found a psychologist here in Hawaii. And it's really important to me that I screen them so that they will be respectful of and understand my spiritual orientation. So I need them to know it's very normal for me that I get messages from the other side. It's very normal that I have dreams. It's very normal that I feel spirit. That's part of my existence. I know very much so that my husband continues to evolve on the other side, and my late husband continues to evolve, and this is my reality. And so I need to make sure that the first time we have that dinner, right,
Yeah.
that you're not going to diagnose this. And so I found someone that not only does brain spotting, she works very spiritually as well. And she said, no problem. Yeah, I work with mediums, like healers, no worry.
Yeah.
Like, perfect.
You're like, oh, okay.
This
yeah.
is it. This is
Yeah.
right. So I found the practitioner in Hawaii, and we met for the first time.
Did you
And
just Google her, or how did you?
I think I can't remember exactly how I found her.
Okay.
It was either I Googled, or I might have found her on Psychology Today, which I'll provide for the notes here of how to find someone to work with, how to find a practitioner, a mental health practitioner that works for you, that meets your needs, your clinical needs, if you have them. And we had the first session, and I wasn't even going in for grief. I didn't realize that this was I didn't realize that that's what it was. And I said in my intake of, I've done so much work around the loss of my late husband. I've done so much work around trauma and grief. And going in, the questions that I really had were around the rebuilding of who I am. So it's like, where's my career going? You know, living life as a young widow, you know, at 39. I'm now 40, but at 39 at that point when I messaged her, and it's like, there were questions still around who I am going forward, and that I felt what was weighing me down. I had no idea what it was that I didn't even know what this modality was, even being a mental health, in the mental health
You're
space.
like, I just got the
Yeah.
sign. Okay, here
Exactly.
I am. I'm open to
Yeah.
whatever's
Yeah.
happening.
My dead husband told me to do this,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
which is kind of what I use as my compass these days, or I have in the
Right?
past. Yeah, it's one of
Yeah.
them. Or my grandmother on the other side, or great grandmother.
Yeah. You're like, so I'm here.
Yeah,
I'm just
so I'm
listening.
here. Yeah, one of my angels told me to come.
Yeah.
But we had the session, and I walked out. And before I sat down, she's like, you know, Lenore, I wonder if you're going to be doing some of this in your own practice. And I was like, I don't know. I can't even
You're
think
like,
about
I
that.
don't even know
Yeah.
what this even is actually.
Yeah.
Like,
Right? Like, why am I here? What am I doing? What is this
Yeah.
life? Like, did I really sign up for this? Okay.
Yeah.
But I walked out of the session, and it was like the world was in Technicolor.
Wow.
And it was like I could see clear. It was like I finally saw, after a couple of years of living here, I was like I could finally see Hawaii for the first time.
Oh,
I could see like the emerald of the green and the
yeah.
turquoise of the blue and like the beak of the myna bird with her
Yeah.
yellow beak. And it was like
Yeah.
things that I hadn't noticed because I was so in my cloud.
Yeah.
And I noticed, and I remember I called my mom the next day called my mom in a parking lot. It's usually a place where I call her. I find like a garage somewhere and I'm like, Mom, we gotta talk. And I called her, I was like, Mom, I don't feel it anymore. The anchor's gone. It's
Wow.
gone. It's not in me.
How long was that session with her? Like
Yeah, it
an
was like
hour
40
or
minutes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I've had so many sessions now because I did, and in
Yeah.
that moment I was like, I've got to bring this forward.
Yeah.
Like more people need to know how is not every teacher, every politician, every
Oh,
human being,
exactly.
parent,
Yeah.
not even not understanding. That's not that. It's not experiencing this.
Yeah.
But as I got into the science of it, as I trained in it, what I realized what it was, and what I realized all of that before of the who am I going forward, and am I going to have love again, and these
Mm-hmm.
questions that I was kind of almost driving myself mad with, and the anchor and all of these different things, and how am I rebuilding my life, and all of this kind of swirling. It's like the hamster wheel in the head, in the
Mm-hmm.
mind. All of that at the core, what it
Mm-hmm.
was in kind of technical terms, dysregulation around in the nervous system around an issue.
Mm-hmm.
When we feel like we're quote unquote losing our minds,
Mm-hmm.
because I definitely felt at some points like like I was spinning out, like I was losing it.
Mm-hmm.
I know based on the writings that my late husband left that he felt like he was losing it, losing his
Mm-hmm.
mind, going crazy, whatever the words are. Those aren't words that I would ever use, yeah, but in my lived experience on the other side of the table, that's how it felt.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes what it is at the core is unprocessed emotions that resonate, going back to the beginning of our conversation, that resonate in the deep brain, in the subcortical.
Mm-hmm.
And when there is emotional dysregulation means the nervous system is out of whack. We're in extreme fight or flight, or we're maybe in extreme dissociation where we feel numb, we're out of body, we're not here, we're just going through the motions, we're faking a smile, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is. Of course, there's extremes and there's levels within there. But at the core, what it is, it's a physiological reaction to something that's happened to us. And
Mm-hmm.
whether it was someone's late husband tragically passing, or if it was, a parent yelled at a child at a young age, or if there was something significant like what happened to my husband in his childhood,
Mm-hmm.
or, I mean, maybe someone got bullied for 30 seconds as a kid and that stuck
Mm-hmm.
with them, or they got scolded in a way that
Mm-hmm.
hurt them, whatever it is, that big T, little t,
Mm-hmm.
it resonates in the body. And until it's allowed to release physiologically from the brain, from the soma, from the spirit and the body, the muscles, our
Mm-hmm.
fascia, it stays within us. And then our mental mind tries to explain it away. And we blame ourselves of why am I not changing? I've done all these things. Or even if we have changes, I know that there were huge shifts even in the other things that I had done. And
Mm-hmm.
all of those things that I had done before prepped me, I believe, really to go so deep with brain spotting, because it's all relative as well, how impactful. This is a very impactful technique, but it still is kind of contingent upon someone's own experience, again, the support they have, how they can integrate it, etc. But there is this incredible opening and emotional freedom that happens when we get really deep into whatever that capsule is that needs to be released of what's happened to us. And for me, that's what happened with brain spotting, and research is coming out. So we're seeing clinical trials coming out. We're seeing comparative studies looking at brain spotting versus EMDR versus CBT, which is that cognitive based therapy. So talk approaches versus mindfulness versus other treatment modalities. And we're seeing that the deeper the regulation in the nervous system, the deeper we can go, the more impactful the modality is for treating deep trauma held in the
Mm-hmm.
body. And so we're seeing in comparative analyses that brain spotting really is one of, if not the most right now,
Mm-hmm.
effective treatments. But again, that's contingent upon individuals. So we need our qualitative research to explore why and for whom that really works.
Mm-hmm.
And also not to negate the healing that happens in those other circles, and not to negate that some of those healing circles or healing modalities, whatever they are, may be more effective for an individual. So there is no panacea, there is no one size fits all by any means.
Mm-hmm.
But we are seeing, I think, as we move forward and more of this, that there are options and that they're really effective for working through what we think is our mind not functioning properly, which may be a part of it, but it's really not that there's something wrong with us. It's that something happened to us, and our brain is working overtime to both protect us and try to figure it out. But the cognitive brain is never going to get there. It's really deep within the body, within the deep, deep brain.
What about if someone's like, they know that they want this, but then yet they're afraid of
Mm.
really diving deep? Like, it's like opening a can of worms. It's
Mhm.
just like, I've functioned this long,
Yeah.
kind of, sort of fine, but like, I like once I take that lid off, like, it's like scary. I don't know
Yeah.
what's gonna be there.
Yeah.
Like I do, but I don't, and I don't know. Do I want to see it? Do I not want to see it? Like, do I want to
Mhm.
release it out of my body? Do I want to just
Mhm.
lock it?
Yeah.
You know?
I think about that vis-a-vis Bruno, my late husband, who locked everything away.
Yes. Yeah.
And he lived with it for, I mean, almost 35 years.
Yeah.
And I mean, ultimately, what happened with his life, that doesn't happen ubiquitously, but he stuffed a lot away.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back and how he lived his life, I feel, this is my assessment of, my personal experience. I feel like to some extent he lived a half life in many
Mm-hmm.
ways. And I know that if I had pretended that what had happened didn't affect me, I would have lived a half life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I understand and I empathize with, okay, I've functioned this long, I've survived this long, but do we really want to survive forever?
Yeah. Do we just want to just be in survival mode, or do we
Right.
want to live a full, beautiful life?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think in that, yes, yes, yes. And in that process of, do we open the can of worms? Oh my goodness, it's scary. And it
Yeah.
also may not be the right time in someone's
Yeah.
life. Again, when is the right time? But I feel like if it's coming up of the questions of like, is this scary? I can't
Mm-hmm.
go there. It's scary. It's scary. I feel like that's something that we're trying to push down that's trying to come up, that's ready
Mm-hmm.
to come up and out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't think it has to happen so fast and so quickly. And
Mm-hmm.
again, looking at my experience, it was really over 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
It was, my body was ready for that experience when it happened, but it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't like that was the only thing out of nowhere. It was in this beautiful container of layers that had been peeled back and gaining strength and knowing myself more and clearing things out of my life over the years that didn't serve me and bringing things in that do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if someone is going to go there, it's really important that they look at, again, brain, body, spirit. So all of those different ways that we can support ourselves, but also community holds that. And
Mm-hmm.
so does someone have the support they need, be it a professional, be it loved ones, be it friends, be it whomever it is, to hold space with them? And can they hold space with themselves and support themselves? Like, do
Mm-hmm.
they have access to tools? But I think in terms of, the question of, I've, and I hear this a lot. I hear this a lot. Not only with men, but I really hear it with my male friends, male
Mm-hmm.
colleagues, even male family members, of like, I've dealt with it. I've dealt with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's how Bruno felt. Like, it happened so long ago. How could that even still be affecting me?
Mm-hmm.
And I always turn to, and I'm a very emotional person, but I also am very objective. And being trained in research, I look to the research. And there's a really interesting line of research around suicidality with men. Of it's oftentimes at these critical junctures of life when they start to remember what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's around like thinking about marriage, having kids, job stress. It's like the stressors in life, but also they're thinking about going forward, of thinking about having children. Of like with Bruno, he had a deep trauma as a child and abuse. So thinking about, what does that do? And,
Mm-hmm.
thinking about generations after.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are these openings that happen. And so I think with Bruno, he was at this really critical juncture. And I think he maybe could have gone a way of asking for help, but I think he didn't allow himself to go there. I
Mm-hmm.
will say the post-COVID world or post-lockdown world, we're talking about trauma. It's not an icky word. It's not a scary word. And
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like a fad word, which
Mm-hmm.
on one hand, we can't loosely use it, but on the other hand, we're finally talking about these things.
Yeah.
We're normalizing getting help. Men are talking about mental health. In his home country, in Bruno's home country of Argentina, this incredible experience and story just happened where a very famous journalist came out on the air and talked about what he endured as a child. And it started this almost Me Too movement in across
Mm-hmm.
Argentina and across the Spanish speaking world of men who have been abused as well. It doesn't just happen to women. I'm talking about sexual abuse. And so it's there's this opening too, and it's not ubiquitous. I would say for the most part, it is still really hard to talk about these things, but there are pockets where there's light. I think that's where my work really wants to and is coming forth. And like, this is where my soul is shining. It's like there's light in the darkness. There can be light in the pain.
Yeah.
And part of it is talking about these things and bringing it forward. And we don't have to just survive forever. And I guess ultimately it's someone's choice if they just want to survive and if they will let the fear keep them in place. And that's someone's, that if that's your prerogative, I respect it. But I will say, kind of, as someone who has found so many layers of myself and shed so many layers of myself, and I feel like I like myself in ways I've never liked myself before, and love myself and respect myself in ways that I didn't even know were possible. All of that came through these years of just showing up and saying, this hurts. I don't like how it feels. I know I have to move through it. I have no idea. I have no idea what's on the other side, and I'm terrified. I'm terrified to live my life on my own. I'm terrified to be a young widow. I'm terrified to have this new spiritual orientation. I'm terrified to be a suicide loss survivor. I'm terrified to wonder what people are thinking about me. And then as I move through it, it's like I'm not so terrified anymore.
Yeah. I think we have to understand too, like, everyone in our life will pass, whether it's tragic suicide or old age or whatever it is. We are all going to die one day.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that trauma right there of just when you love someone so much, and then when that person passes away, it's just like your whole world is like, now what?
Yeah.
Like, what do I do? Where do, and I think that this is going to be so helpful for anyone dealing with any type, whether they lost a parent, or a loved one, a child, anything.
I think too, I mean, my belief is, yes, we all in our physical bodies, like these bodies, obviously, they're not going to exist forever. And maybe some, by the time, I don't know, 2050 comes along, who knows, we'll be like, I don't know, freezing ourselves, who knows, in a Tesla somewhere, I don't know. But I do believe, and like I believe it's evidence and the connections, like our energy, our souls continue on. We keep growing, we keep evolving. I think the reason we do is to, one, continue evolving ourselves, but to continue learning and spreading love and light. And I truly believe that. But I think too, looking at the transmutation that can happen through the loss, and even my body is starting to sit up taller, and it's just like I feel this like strength and light in it. There's so much growth and spillover to other parts of our lives and other humans in our community. So for example, again, I'm really close with my mom and dad, and the last time they were here, nobody wants to talk about in our family when one of our family members crosses over. Of course, nobody wants to talk about that. And we started talking about it. And for me, it was like, and it's obviously we want to talk about like the logistics and those horrible things that we don't want to deal with, but they're a part of it. But also we started talking about like, okay, so when we're on the other side, how are we going to continue communicating? We would have never had these conversations before. And, what are the signs and that we want to send? And my dad's like, well, I'm going to join you when you go surfing all the time. I want to be on the water with you. And just these conversations of it makes it a lot less scary. And so I don't look at it necessarily as like, and yes, of course, there is a death of life in physical form. But to me, I look at it as a continuation. And it makes these difficult parts of life less scary because A, we're talking about them, B, we're normalizing them, C, we're bringing some light into it, and D, we're almost like addressing it before we have to address it. And so and I think this is part of that like spiritual growth that inevitably happens when we are working through deep trauma, because we feel something, and it doesn't have to be, for me, it's not religious, for someone it may be, but it's this connection to a higher energy, soul, whatever it is. And when that comes online, there's this relaxing of the ego and a relaxing of the fear. And what I was saying before, all these things that seem terrifying, really those are expressions or manifestations of things that we're afraid of in this human life. But for me, and like recognizing that we continue and our soul is continuing to move and grow for who knows for how long, eternity, who knows, until the Teslas are, like we said, right? I don't know.
There'll be freezers and coffin. There'll be a Tesla you can drive and then turn into a freezer coffin.
Totally. But we have, it almost takes the pressure off of now.
Yeah.
And so it's like, why not do the work and just explore it?
Then it becomes a beautiful thing. I feel like,
Yeah.
I think that maybe when you can talk about it, like you said, talk about it before you have to talk about it, or
Mm-hmm.
face it before you have to face it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then it becomes a beautiful thing where you're just like, hey, well, when it's my time, then I
Yeah.
feel like these are the signs,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think it also gives the other person too the like it's not so scary. It's just
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, let me prepare myself that if I go first or if you go first, like this is gonna be, like
Mm-hmm.
these are the ways I'm gonna show you that I'm around and
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be okay. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you'll continue growing and evolving and shining light and learning. And
Yes.
this is
Yeah.
part of that human experience is
Yeah.
continuing to evolve.
Yeah. I think though, another thing too is I think that maybe if someone's going through the trauma, in a way, sometimes they may feel like for me to honor you, to show you, even on the other side, that I still love you, I'm
Mm.
going to live in this grief,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
which is hard,
Yeah.
because then, like, if with family members or whatever, like maybe that your spouse's family members,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they haven't moved on yet, but maybe you feel you're ready to move on. But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, it's like, how do I move on in a way that's respectful,
Mm-hmm.
in a way that's I still honor and I still love you, but I know I still love me and I want to grow and I want to move forward.
Yeah.
But
Oh.
I don't want to be disrespectful to anyone in,
Mm-hmm.
that maybe they're not ready, but I'm ready.
That is such a good question.
Yeah.
And I'll say first, and I can speak to being a widow, like everyone will have opinions. There will be
Yeah.
unsolicited advice coming at you from like day one.
Right? When you
And
should date, when you should get over it, when you
yeah,
should start. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, oh my goodness. And you can't like quote unquote do it right from someone else's perspective.
Yeah.
If you're dating at 3 months, someone will judge you. If you're saying at 3 months, no way, they'll be encouraging you to get out there, whatever it
Right.
means.
Yeah.
And so I think what I use, and I continue to use this, and I was such a people pleaser. Oh my gosh. Like from childhood, such a people pleaser. And as soon as Bruno passed, I realized I was like, I cannot, if I'm going to survive this, and it
Yeah.
was survival at the beginning,
Yeah.
I cannot be a people pleaser. Like I've got to please myself, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And so I just got really, really real with myself from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And I've used that as like
Mm-hmm.
I don't have that black ball of iron ball anymore. I have
Yeah.
this light in me, and I know that it's really bright when I'm super in tune with myself.
Yeah.
And so I'll say though, but okay, so there's the external things. And I guess my advice would be, and this is much easier said than done, but it's what is that inner voice in you saying? And it
Mm-hmm.
gets stronger with each iteration. Each time we tune in and honor it, it gets stronger. We get stronger. We
Mm-hmm.
practice, we grow with it. But then, so that's how we deal with the external, but then the internal of, am I honoring my person? Am I, you know, being
Mm-hmm.
true to them and still keeping them alive? And there was an experience that I had, and this really, and I knew in my heart, just feeling Bruno so close all the time, I knew that he was like, whatever I needed for myself, he was right there with me
Mm-hmm.
and backing me up. And that was very much our dynamic before. We were
Mm-hmm.
very complementary to each other. It's like, I've got you, and again, that was part of the irony of what happened is, but we've always been each other's person, cheerleader. Anyway, but aside from that, but I really felt it after. And I had a Reiki healing maybe 2 years or so after he had crossed over. And it was still very visceral, very early on. And I have like very wild meditations oftentimes, and they're in energy healing even more so. And so they're very visual and very sentient. So I feel things, hear things, see things. They're beautiful. And it was here in Hawaii. It was on Oahu. And in the experience, he was very close to me. And he took me on this like wild ride through the mountains and whatever it was. And he told me at the end, find me in the joy. And I said,
Beautiful.
yes. And I said, well, what do you mean? I was like, what brings me joy? Because at that point, it was still very early. And I was like, I don't even know. Sometimes there's slivers of joy, but it was still very
Yeah.
early. And he said, whatever is bringing you joy, it can be the sand, the surf, the mountains, the air, the
Oh,
birds, whatever it is.
that's where you
Friends,
find me.
that's where you find me. And after that, I held that with me. And it's been like I feel it in my heart. And
Yeah.
that's one of my truths of wherever there's happiness and joy. That was our relationship. We had such a peaceful, loving marriage. And it's like, that's us. It was never grief. It was never trauma. So much so that he never wanted to bring it forward and talk about it with me because I feel like more than anything, he didn't want to burden me.
Yeah.
And we both are such empathic beings. We feel each other's pain. And I knew that there was something there, but he would tell me there wasn't. And I wanted to believe that when he was physically here. But now there's no facade, there's no BS. It's all emotion, all feeling, all sentience. And so it's interesting, but I feel him most strongly now when there is light, when there's joy. And I know he's around when I need him, and he was there in those first few years when I really needed him. But now when I feel him the closest, when I get his signs, it's when life is like really expansive and I'm not necessarily thinking like, Bruno, I really need you right now,
Yeah.
which is much less common than it used to be. I don't really call on him like I used to before. I call
Yeah.
on myself more. But it's when it's expansive and he'll drop a sign. It's like, oh yeah, like we're in
Yeah.
this together. Your energy is here.
Yeah.
And it feels really bright and
Yeah.
happy and our relationship. And so honoring him, yeah, it's like I honor him by honoring myself.
Yes.
I'm standing in my truth, and I know that I'm being led on a purpose that's much higher than me, much bigger than me, much bigger than my pain, even bigger than Bruno's pain and what we experienced together. And I know that, I have people sometimes that reach out and email, and like, I've read an article you wrote, or I heard you on a podcast, and I can go to therapy now. I heard Bruno's story, or I feel like, I can maybe get out there again as a young widow, or whatever it is. And it's like, how better to honor him than in spreading light and feeling that myself, and then maybe bringing other people along into light, and then they bring their light and it gets bigger and bigger.
Yes. And letting other people know that they too can find themselves in joy,
Exactly.
and through joy.
Exactly.
They don't have to just live with the grief.
Yes, and that we
Yeah.
can find them even more viscerally in the
Yeah.
brightness and the joy. Like I
Yeah.
don't find him in the grief, and I don't
Yeah.
really feel that grief anymore
Yeah.
by what I've done with Brainspotting and the other modalities. But
Yeah.
I don't find him there. I find this part of me that I have so much compassion for that I no longer feel is in my body. I find him in happiness, in light.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to think in 4 years you've come so far. Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you so much for sharing that beautiful
you.
story with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for holding space. Thank you to anyone tuning in who needed to hear that, maybe the story,
Yeah.
but also is tuning into their story and their journey and their evolution and their layers and their
Yeah.
peeling back. And I think if there's one thing that I could leave with or leave people with, I never heard when I was going through this that there's another possibility. I only heard that there is that iron ball that's going to be with you forever. And I said, I don't accept it. That's not my truth. And so if I can put a perspective out there, it's that it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to always have the pain. You don't have to build around the pain and still feel the pain. Is that the pain can transmute into something else. It can become something else. And we'll still have our experiences. It's not like we're bypassing them. We're not tucking them away or forgetting them or pretending they didn't happen or erasing them. It's that we're holding them in a different way that's not so emotionally charged with what hurts, but what can change into something that's really beautiful by way of allowing ourselves to be in the breakdown and be curious about what might come out of it.
It's beautiful. If someone wants to work with you or follow you, or how would they get in touch with you if they're interested in brain spotting?
Yes. So I would say for very early trauma brain spotting, I have on my resources page. So if you're going
Okay.
through the deep trauma processing, you can check out my resources page on my website, which is drlenorematthew.com. There's a resources page there. So I'm not working in the trauma processing. That really calls for someone who works in clinical psychology or clinical therapy to hold that space with brain spotting.
Okay.
So to work with me, if you're ready for really moving into, you've done the heavy lifting, you've done the processing, now you know you are here, and you knew all along you were here for a reason, a big purpose, but you're wanting to unfold it. Maybe there's still a little something holding you back. You're wanting to really manifest and open up and expand that purpose. Then you can find me for brain spotting and workshops. And then I'm also quite active on social media, so you can find me at Dr. Lenore Matthew, Dr. Lenore Matthew on Instagram.
Beautiful. Thank you. And thank you so much for tuning in and listening. I truly believe if you've made it this far in the episode, you are meant to find this podcast, and this podcast was meant for you. So thank you so much. I love to hear where you're listening in from. So I would love it if you could take a screenshot or connect with us, share your stories with us. I'm on Instagram, the Mapuana Reed Show. or on the website, mapuanareed.com. Thank you so much. We will see you in the next episode. Also, all of Lenore's things will be in the show notes. See you in the next episode.